While I was researching the last actress in this series, Marguerite, I came across this unfortunate actress while going through the year Marguerite died, 1950. This particular actress was never fully in the spotlight, only appearing in a handful of movies in small roles, but she was on the screen alongside some of the biggest names of the time, such as Valentino and Gloria Swanson. If her name does ring a bell, it might be because of the way she died, but I wanted to see if I could find out more about her life, her happier times. I wanted to know more about Yvonne Hughes. Evelyn Marie Hughes was born on July 5, 1902 in McKeesport, Allegheny County in Pennsylvania. Her father, William John Hughes, was a millwright in a paper mill, and her mother's name was Eva Lindemeyer. William was brother to Charles Evans Hughes, who was the 36th governor of New York from 1907 to 1910, and was the 44th U.S. Secretary of State. He also served as the 11th Chief Justice of the United States. According to census records, Evelyn was the second youngest out of 2 boys and 3 girls. In 1910, the family was living in house number 2914 Shady Avenue in McKeesport. I went looking for the location on Google Maps Street View, but as with many cities of the past, there were many changes in the street names and numbers. But this might be the area where it was located. In her preteen years, Evelyn was sent to attend the Margaret Morrison Carnegie School for Women in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Here the courses included everything from sewing and personal hygiene, to art classes, to the principles of science and economics, to also social ethics and history. Evelyn was partial to the art classes and later took up dancing. During this time, she met Charles Alvin Feck, also from McKeesport, Pennsylvania, and they would marry on October 20th, 1917. She was 15, he was 19. On August 30th, 1918, Evelyn would give birth to her one and only child, Charles Jr. On a 1920 census, we can see the family living on Glen Avenue in the township of Jefferson in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. Charles was working as a clerk in a construction company as Evelyn seemed to settle in as being a mother and a housewife. At least, that's what it seemed. Little is known during this period in her life, especially her relationship with her husband, but there were obviously problems. Although they were still living together according to that census, they separated approximately in 1919. And according to a passport, she divorced her husband on November 6, 1920. She had also won a beauty contest put on by a Pittsburgh newspaper, and she decided to head to New York to try her luck on the stage. Here is where she started calling herself Yvonne Hughes. Charles retained custody of Charles Jr. and married just 2 months after their divorce. That marriage was successful and produced another 6 children. Was Yvonne being selfish for leaving her child for the stages of New York? Did she leave because she was no longer in love with her husband, or did he fall in love with someone else? And did she realize that her ex-husband might be able to give the child a better life in a loving home? We will never know what those circumstances were. Yvonne would pound the pavement going to auditions. It didn't take long for Yvonne to catch the eye of one Florence Ziegfeld. With her natural skill of dancing combined with her beauty, he cast her as a background dancer in the musical Sally, which played at the New Amsterdam Theater in New York. It had its opening December 21st, 1920, and closed out April 22nd, 1922. You will sadly not find her name on websites pertaining to this musical, but according to the papers of the time, she was in it, but maybe not for the whole run. She would next find herself taking part in the famous performances of the Ziegfeld rooftop garden productions, such as the New Amsterdam Theater roof, which was renamed the Ziegfeld roof in 1915. Here, the famous Ziegfeld Midnight Frolics would be featured from 1918 to 1922. She would also perform on the Century Theater roof garden, which Ziegfeld opened in 1917 and renamed it Coconut Grove. We know she was dancing on that Century roof and disappeared for a couple months from this brief article in a 1921 Broadway magazine. Yvonne Hughes, the Mona Lisa of the Century roof, did a disappearing act for about 2 months. Tell us, Yvonne, did you go back to Pittsburgh? But why not give the unimportant ones the air and get somewhere? The continual rounds of parties means nothing but loss of sleep and beauty. So why keep up the pace? Although Time has forgotten to mention her in modern-day websites and articles, she was popular enough to have been asked about her absence from the Follies through this publication. It also seems from this brief mention that she was known on the party scene and may have gone back to Pennsylvania to visit relatives. It seems Yvonne was trying to find extra work between the Ziegfeld productions, as we can see here from this snippet from a 1922 magazine. Miss Yvonne Hughes, the New York chorus girl who tried an employment agency and found out that showgirls are not welcome in domestic service. It seems many wives did not want showgirls to be in their homes, especially around their husbands, no matter if they were just there to clean the floors, as a scandal could be just around the corner. On October 17, 1922, J.E. Brulator, a once pivotal figure in the film industry, bought the film rights for the successful play Lawful Larceny. He did this for his main squeeze, Hope Hampton, a beauty queen who he took under his wing to manage her career. By then, he was head of Kodak. Hope had already had some success on the screen, but Brulator was hoping the screen version of this theater favorite play would shoot her straight to the top. The two of them would get married on August 22nd, 1923. This would be his third marriage. Another side note here. His second wife was Dorothy Gibson, the actress and socialite that survived the sinking of the Titanic. And she also starred in the first motion picture based on the disaster, 1912's Saved from the Titanic. Hope Hampton would of course get top billing for the screen version of Lawful Larceny, alongside Conrad Nagel, and cast as the vamp, a Cleopatra as it were, as it was stated in magazines of the time, was the gorgeous Nita Naldi. And when you need dancers for a film, where do you turn? The Follies, of course. The dancers would be led by one of the most famous Follies of the time, Gilda Gray. Dancing alongside her would be Florence O'Denishon and Alice Mason. Although Gilda was a bigger name, Yvonne would be credited in the film as Billy Vandeveer and had a bigger part. She didn't just dance. She acted, as seen here in this photo with Hope and Lou Cody, who plays Guy Tarlow in the film. Gilda and the other dancers were credited in the film simply as dancers. Also starring in the film was the future Mrs. Barrymore, Dolores Costello, playing a maid. Even though this movie was 9 years before the Hays Code, it seemed that one of the dances planned was thought too much for audiences. It was to be performed by Gilda Gray, based on her famous shimmy. For the movie, they planned for her to do a more exotic, extreme version of the dance, and some of the backers of the film said, "Oh heck no," so Gilda had to tone it down. Alan Dwan was to produce the picture for Paramount and had big plans, especially with the sets. One of the artists he tasked with making the huge Egyptian set come to life was Bill Salter, chief scenic artist at the Long Island studio. This included building monster-sized statues representing pharaohs, as seen in this photo. Nita Naldi seems tiny sitting on this huge pharaoh's lap. And here is a description and review of the movie I found in a 1923 magazine. The story concerns a young wife who, on returning from a trip abroad, finds that her husband has fallen into the clutches of a designing woman, Vivian Hepburn, played by Nita Naldi, who owns a gambling house. The husband has given an IOU for a very large amount. The wife sets about to get his money as well as her husband's IOU back, and thereby saving his honor. How she succeeds is interestingly shown in the ensuing scenes of the picture, in which Miss Hampton, in a decidedly novel manner, to effect an acquaintance with Guy Tarlow, played by Lou Cody, accomplice to Vivian, who is known as the modern Cleopatra, and who has Marion's husband under her thumb. Tarlow brings the wife to Vivian's gambling rooms. Matters become decidedly complicated when the latter learns the identity of the new visitor. The article goes on to say, 3 of the most popular forms of exhibition dancing are shown in Lawful Larceny by 3 of Broadway's favorite dancers. Gilda Gray is seen in the cabaret scenes of her picture in the South Sea Dance, which has made her famous as the premier dancer at the Rendezvous, one of New York's leading dance clubs. In the prologue of the picture, Florence O'Denishon interprets an ancient Egyptian dance as a colorful background for Nita Naldi, who is shown in a Cleopatra tableau. Alice Mason and her partner present a modern ballroom with eccentric dancing in the cabaret sequence. I would love to show you these amazing dance sequences, but unfortunately most of the film is considered lost. But it is rumored that 6 minutes of the film survived, but it's hard to find, if it even does exist. That's another reason why I do give a brief synopsis or overview of the films, because a lot of times they don't survive and we can't watch them anymore, and I would like you to know what they were about. Lawful Larceny was released in July of 1923. Then in August, Yvonne would get some devastating news. On August 12, 1923 at 2:15 p.m., her father, William Hughes, would pass away from heart disease. From his death certificate, we can see at the time he is working as an electrician and had been seeing a doctor steadily since June 1st. Her father was buried on August 16th at the McKeesport and Versailles Cemetery in McKeesport, Pennsylvania. He was only 52 years old. Long before the release of Lawful Larceny, Yvonne was already working on another picture with one of the most famous and beautiful faces of the time, Gloria Swanson. The movie Zaza would be released in October of 1923 and was directed by Alan Dwan for Paramount Pictures. Alan Dwan, who was the director for Lawful Larceny. Here is a description I captured from a 1923 magazine of the film. Zaza of Paris, music hall favorite, falls desperately in love with Bernard Dufresne, played by H.B. Warner, who has frequently attended her performances, but realizing that he is losing his heart to her, he decides to keep away. He goes once more to the music hall, and that night, a jealous rival performer severs the rope of a swing on which Zaza flies over the audience. She falls and is severely hurt. Dufresne comes to her aid and has her nursed back to health in a suburban cottage in which he installs her. He accepts a diplomatic post in the service of the French government at Washington. Zaza begs him to take her to America, but he is compelled to refuse. Believing there is another woman on the case, Zaza visits his Paris home and discovers that he has a wife and child. She resolves to forget him. And in the final interview gives him to understand that she is going to wed the Duke de Brissac, played by Ferdinand Gottschalk. Dufresne and his family go to the U.S. Zaza does not accept the Duke's offer of marriage. She becomes a great actress. At the close of the World War, she and Dufresne meet again. His wife has died in the interval. Through the influence of his young daughter, Dufresne and Zaza are reconciled. And here is Yvonne. She plays Natalie, Zaza's maid. As you can see in the beginning, Zaza seems to be quite cruel to her and likes to tease her. Even the reviewers and the critics noticed her. And here is a quote from one of those critics. Zaza's maid, portrayed by Yvonne Hughes, attracted our attention. The young woman photographs well and was rather subtle in many scenes where naturally she played only a most infinitesimal part. So it seems although Yvonne had a lesser part than the others, she did grab the critics' attention. It seemed that she might have been on the path that would bring her to some fame, maybe even to become a star in her own right one day. And the studios might have noticed as well. Around this time, the studios, through the papers, started promoting Yvonne's name alongside her uncle, who was then Secretary of State, Charles Evans Hughes. You can see by this short paragraph in a popular magazine at the time. With the expected arrival shortly of Yvonne Hughes, niece of Secretary of State Hughes, Los Angeles screen celebrities and also Smart Circle are preparing a warm welcome for the former Follies girl, at present in Miami. They refer to her as a former Follies girl, although truthfully she had only taken time off to film and technically she was still under contract with the Follies. I am curious who the screen celebrities were, but I couldn't find that info. I think here, the studio was trying to push her as an actress and distance her from her dancing, at least in the public eye. And here in another magazine, we can see her relaxing with an unknown friend on a beach somewhere in Miami, again referencing her uncle. Eastern society likes Florida's winters. Here, Miss Yvonne Hughes of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, niece of Secretary of State Hughes, is enjoying a chat with a friend on the beach in Miami. And here we can see her having a page to herself in another popular magazine of 1923, again referencing her uncle. Miss Yvonne Hughes, she is niece of Secretary of State Hughes and is now playing in Robin Hood. It's a great family. Wait a second, Robin Hood? The one with Douglas Fairbanks? That movie was released in October of 1922, but Yvonne does not show up in the credits, nor is she listed on IMDB. Is it possible she was in the film? The movie had a huge number of extras, and yes, it is possible. And if you look at who the director was, Alan Dwan, I say that's a huge indication she might be in there. I rewatched the movie and looked closely at Maid Marian's ladies, and although a couple do look like her, I don't think she's in there. But this one scene shortly after where Robin has just won the joust, he has a huge swarm of beautiful maidens chasing him. Is she one of these extras? I say it's a good possibility again, as not all of these women would have been credited in the film. And one source where you could get a large handful of beautiful, graceful women to be in your film, well, is the Follies. And I found this photo spread in a French magazine of Robin Hood, and look whose name is here. I need to do some comparisons, because if I can find her in this film and confirm it's her, I would love to give that back to Yvonne, even in some small way. I do believe she was in this film, but others might be harder to convince. I may do a separate update video if I find anything. Yvonne would appear in another movie that would be released December 12, 1923. The movie was Big Brother, which would be yet another picture produced for Paramount by Alan Dwan, under the banner of the famous Players Lasky Corporation. It was based on the novel by Rex Beach. Jesse L. Lasky in an article describes what the novel was based on, and thus the movie. It's the story of New York gangdom and the work of the Big Brother movement in protecting and rescuing boys from evil surroundings in our big cities. Behind the writing of Big Brother is an appealing human interest story. Mr. Beach was in Washington some time ago during a convention of the Big Brother organization. He became acquainted with several leaders of the movement, and from what they told him of the work of their organization, he was inspired to write the novel. And here is a very brief synopsis of the actual film from a 1923 magazine. It is a story of New York gang life, which tells of the efforts of Jimmy Donovan, a gang leader, to correct his ways and care for the little brother of his chief lieutenant, who has been killed by a rival. The article goes on to say the movie had filmed at New York locations mentioned in the novel, from Bellevue Hospital to the Harlem Casino. It also mentions that most of the characters, the background characters, were recruited from the environment described in the story and were portrayed without a change in attire and usually with no trace of makeup, which is usually considered necessary. In fact, there is a story that Alan Dwan hired 2 rival gangs for the film, which would be risky. But it is said that both gangs behaved until Alan Dwan gave them the cue to fight, and fight they did. It is also said that due to hiring the locals, the New York police could be seen on set, ready to step in when needed. Tom Moore plays Jimmy Donovan. Mickey Bennett, who is touted as the next Jackie Coogan, played his ward Midge Murray. Paul Panzer plays gangster Mike Navarro, and Yvonne plays Navarro's girl. No name, just credited as Navarro's girl. I was very lucky through my research to find this rare photo of her in a magazine in that role, sitting with Paul Panzer, who plays Navarro, and Raymond Hatton, who plays Cokie Joe Miller. Sadly, this film is considered lost, and I would have loved to have seen Yvonne in that role. Before the release of Big Brother, she had started filming another film under Alan Dwan, A Society Scandal, that would be released in March of 1924. This would be another film starring Gloria Swanson. Again, Dwan would look to the Follies for the dance sequences in the film, but he gave Yvonne another credited acting role as Patricia DeVoe. She even had her name mentioned in this full-page ad of a popular magazine at the time. The movie also stars Ricardo Cortez and Rod LaRocque. And yes, before you even ask, this movie is also considered lost. Although Yvonne was still under contract with the Follies, she was still being recruited by the movie studios but had yet to get her one big shot at a leading lady role. The next film she would appear in would be with the biggest star of the day, Rudolph Valentino. The movie Monsieur Beaucaire, which would be released August 11th, 1924. Valentino had been absent from the screen for a few years on what some papers were calling a retirement. There is a whole story behind the real reason, but I will leave that up to others to cover. And this was being considered his big comeback for the screen. He was promised $7,500 a week by Ritz-Carlton Pictures, working through famous players, and he was also to have creative control. His wife at the time, Natasha Rambova, was part of the negotiating process, which included a 2-picture deal with the famous players and 4 pictures with Ritz-Carlton. The story is of the Duke of Chartres, Valentino, who is known as a ladies' man and who likes to entertain at the court of Louis XV. During one of his performances, he exchanges glances with the Princess Henriette, played by Bebe Daniels, and there is an instant attraction. But due to his reputation with the women, Henriette wants nothing to do with him, although her heart is tempted. The king orders Chartres to accompany Henriette to Madame du Pompadour's for a gathering. There, Chartres flirts with other women, trying to make Henriette jealous, but it does not work. During the feast, Henriette teases and laughs at him. Just when he has grown tired of her insults, King Louis announces that he has decided Chartres will marry Henriette, which Chartres angrily refuses. Having insulted the king, he flees to England and disguises himself as a barber of a French ambassador. He sees Lady Mary, the Belle of Bath, played by Doris Kenyon, and becomes deeply infatuated with her beauty. When he catches the Duke of Winterset cheating at cards, he makes Winterset introduce him as Monsieur Beaucaire, a nobleman, to the Lady Mary. At first, there is a passion between the two, but when she finds out that he might be just a barber, she loses interest and even seems disgusted. When it is revealed at a ball later who he really is, she tries to lure him back, but as he has already been burned, Chartres turns down her charms and goes back to France. He finally realizes who he truly loves, Henriette. Henriette truly does love him, and they promise to be together. Also starring in the movie is Lois Wilson as Queen Marie, Lowell Sherman as King Louis, Paulette Duval as Madame de Pompadour, mistress to the king, John Davidson as Richelieu, Flora Finch as Duchess of Montmorency, Ian McLaren as Duke of Winterset, and a host of others, including Andre Davin, who plays Valentino's brother in the film. Valentino handpicked Andre as he believed there was a resemblance between the two of them. Yvonne plays the role of Duchess de Floholt, who Chartres is flirting with in a few scenes. She is even seen sitting beside him at the banquet. Now, the issue with this movie is trying to figure out who is who on the screen. The announcement card that you see in many silent movies, as seen in this example, is only reserved for the top stars of the film, and it seems the credits are missing many of the names. Not to mention the poor quality of the surviving available prints of the film, it is hard to recognize faces. The woman at the beginning that dances with Valentino looks a little bit like Yvonne, but from this article it states that it is in fact Florence O'Denishon. We can confirm Yvonne's role as it was advertised through reviews and announcements in the movie magazines of the time. Many other Ziegfeld girls were hired to be in the background. The Mark Strand ballet dancers also appeared in the film in the ballroom scenes. Rambova would be behind the camera with the director, and it was said she was demanding and controlling. She was one of 3 art directors and was included in some of the costume designs. She was blamed in part for the movie's poor reception by audiences and critics, and newspapers were reporting she was barred from future Valentino sets. The movie, when first released, looked like it was going to be a huge success, but some didn't know how to take Valentino in the role, especially the smaller town markets. Said he was too dandy, all frilled up in this picture, a far cry from his roles in such movies as The Sheik and The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. One review from a small town even mentioned some of the audience didn't like seeing Valentino in frilly pantaloons. A side note, in December of 1924, a short movie spoof was released called Monsieur Don't Care, starring Stan Laurel, who credited under the name Rhubarb Vaselino. Back to Yvonne. She was just on screen with Swanson, and now she was with one of the biggest names of the time, Valentino. It looked like her career may have just gotten a big boost. And it seems Yvonne might have been in yet another Valentino movie, which she is not credited for on sites like IMDB. As you can see by this 1925 promo of Yvonne, it lists A Sainted Devil is yet another film she was in, at least that's what it says. Is it possible she is in it? Sadly, the movie is lost, so it's hard to verify. But seeing as she was just in Monsieur Beaucaire, it is a good possibility she was in it. Even in the background, a background dancer. And if she wasn't in it, why the heck would they advertise her name beside it in a paper from 1925? But that isn't the only movie that she might have been in during 1924 that isn't listed on such sites as, again, IMDB. Here is an article regarding the movie Her Love Story, also released in 1924, starring Gloria Swanson and directed by Alan Dwan, a name we've heard numerous times already. Mr. Dwan was about to give up the chase when he suddenly thought of the famous Broadway show which glorifies the American girl. Getting in touch with the casting director, Mr. Dwan told him to get 6 girls who had experience in the Ziegfeld Follies. The next day, Yvonne Hughes, Vivian Vernon, Betty Williams, Vera Sisson, Mae Beck, and Marie Shelton were passed before the critical eyes of the director and immediately engaged with the remark that if there was any place in New York where a girl had to acquire grace or lose her job, it was with the Ziegfeld show. Even the real Baroness de Hedemann, who plays in the picture and also assisted Mr. Dwan with advice on the customs of European royalty, had to admit the girls would pass muster at any court reception. And here's another mention in this brief article. Yvonne Hughes, who recently completed the role of the Duchess de Florholt in the Sidney Olcott production for Paramount, Monsieur Beaucaire, which stars Rudolph Valentino, has been added to the cast of A Woman of Fire, the new Alan Dwan production starring Gloria Swanson. A Woman of Fire was the working title for Her Love Story, and it is hard to confirm visually that she was in it, as again this is sadly another film considered lost. Also during this time, Yvonne was getting ready to go abroad for a 6-month tour with some of the other Ziegfeld girls and with some other dancers from other shows. And from a passport associated with this tour, we can see where Yvonne was living in 1924, the Allerton Hotel for Women, located at 130 East 5th Street, New York City. A 17-story brick building built in 1923 that could house over 400 business and professional women and doubled as a shelter for young girls. It had a rooftop terrace and stores on the main floor. And here it is today. I am personally very surprised it still stands, especially in New York City. Same building, but now known as Hotel 57. Still has gorgeous views from their rooftop terrace, which I would love to see, but my pocketbook says otherwise. Here is that passport from that trip. You can see they were headed towards France, then possibly England and Italy. They set sail on the SS France on the 29th of October 1924. Traveling with her would be Grace Gerard, Ruth Fallows, Doris Lloyd, Sybil Wilson, and Nina Byron. They were heading to Paris to appear in the Jacques Charles Revue for the reopening of the famous Moulin Rouge Theatre. Helen Macdonald, Patty Coleman, and others would follow. It is said when American men found out about their trip and which ship the girls would be on, there was a rush to book passage on that ship, mainly by several young millionaires, according to the papers. The girls were being paid $40 a week, which is just about $700 a week today. And they weren't going to be just paid for the shows, but also for the rehearsals. They would also have the return passage to America paid for by the Revue. Issues occurred almost immediately. They started rehearsing with the French girls of the revue, and jealousy started rearing its ugly little head. Especially when the French dancers found out how much the Folly girls were getting paid, as the French dancers were earning half of what the American dancers were. Then Yvonne and the other American dancers saw their costumes. It was said the girls were 100% American, and the audience would see 90% of their nationality in the skimpy clothing. Although the Follies were known for some of their controversial costumes and shows, the girls became a bit nervous. But then they decided, rather hesitantly, the show must go on, so they agreed to wear them, as only paying theater goers inside were going to see those costumes, right? Well, that's what they thought. But the management of the show had something else in mind for the girls, and that is when the girls put their collective feet down. Here is an article from December 1924 that describes what happened. 8 American showgirls brought to Paris to speed up a revue for the reopening of the Moulin Rouge have gone on strike, refusing to wear scanty stage costumes outside of the theater. The management of the Moulin Rouge arranged a Montmartre dance hall to send the octet of American beauties to his place at midnight as dancers. Kylie instructed that the girls wear the daring costumes in which they appear in a big scene in the revue, but the girls stated while it might be all right to wear risque robes on the stage, it was an entirely different matter to sit in a dance hall and foxtrot with the customers and friends in abbreviated costumes, so they refused. Friday night, the theater management was seeing a compromise, but Thursday night, the girls refused to go on. The girls are Helen MacDonald of the Greenwich Village Follies, Doris Lloyd of the Ziegfeld Follies, Nina Byron, who understudied Gilda Gray, Ruth Fallows, an artist's model, Sybil Wilson and Yvonne Hughes, both of the Ziegfeld Follies, Grace Gerald, a New York beauty, and Patty Coleman of the Charlotte Revue. The news also got into the French papers, of course, and called out the fact there was a dual standard for decency between the Americans and the French. They called Americans hypocrites, stating in their words, the American tourist is always the greediest patron of the Parisian vulgarities. And to come out of all this exposure, never mind the pun, was a vigilance committee called the Filth League for the Raising of Public Morality. And the American newspapers fired back, questioning the taste of some of the French shows, as shown in 2 of these photographs. Here, you can see a scantily clad dancer nailed to a cross. And well, you can see what's happening in this scene. They're on a spit, nude, portraying turkeys. The dancers, including Yvonne, were discharged Christmas Day. That is a polite way of saying they were fired. Most sailed back home, but Yvonne and Grace Girard stayed for 1 more week as tourists. So did the girls come back home in disgrace? Flo Ziegfeld stood by his dancers, including Yvonne, and made them all a promise of a job as soon as they set foot back on American soil. Yvonne went back to the Folly stage, but then in early 1925 found herself called into the studio yet again to appear in a Billy West comedy titled Oh Horace, which finished filming November 11, 1925. Also in the film was Emily Fitzroy, Clara Horton, and John J. Richardson. The film would be released almost a year later in December of 1926 under the title The Trouble Chaser. She didn't have a huge role, but her name was mentioned in the papers associated with the movie. I could not find a copy of this film, but I checked the Library of Congress's list of lost films. Sadly, currently there are over 7,200 films on that list and counting. and it's not there. So hopefully there is a surviving copy out there in someone's collection. Then we find another movie she might have been in, according to this short article from October 17th, 1926. Yvonne Hughes, who plays Duchess de Floald in support of the late Rudolph Valentino in Monsieur Bouquet, and who danced the Argentine tango with the same star in The Sainted Devil, has returned to the screen after an absence of 2 years, and will also be seen in Paramount's production of New York. This short paragraph seems to confirm yet again she was in The Sainted Devil with Valentino and might have even danced with him. Again, hard to confirm with it being a lost film. And because O Horace would be released 2 months after this article, she did have an absence of almost 2 years. With the mention of her name with Valentino's, it seemed the studio was trying to tie her to the late great star, as Valentino had passed away in August of 1926. Perhaps they were trying to give her a career boost. They saw something in her or they wouldn't bother. The movie New York stars Ricardo Cortez, Lois Wilson, Estelle Taylor, and William Powell, who in a lot of reviews I read dominates this film. A short description of the movie from a 1927 magazine. Bowery musician, played by Ricardo Cortez, becomes engaged to a society heiress, played by Lois Wilson, and is visited by an old sweetheart, played by Estelle Taylor, whose jealous husband, played by William Powell, kills her. Musician is tried and found guilty of murder, but eventually the truth comes out and he marries the heiress. Again, her name is not listed with the movie on popular sites such as IMDB, so I cannot find out what part she played, if she even was in it at all. In my opinion, I believe she was. They would need dancers and attractive women in the nightclub scenes, and Yvonne would be a good pick, even for the background. But sadly, this is yet another film that is lost, confirmed by the Library of Congress. Long before the release of New York, Yvonne was busy in rehearsals for Ziegfeld's next huge production, Rio Rita, as you can see here in this photo from December 1926. From left to right is Ethelyn Terry, the star, Dorothy Wedgman, Marie Lambert, Dorothy Didrikson, beside her is Yvonne, then Marion Benda, yes, that Marion Benda, who is said to be dating Valentino the same time Pola was before his death, and Agatha Debussy. The photo caption states Ethelind is instructing the girls in Castilian. The opening night for the show would be February 2nd, 1927 at the Ziegfeld Theater in New York at 54th Street and 6th Avenue. The theme of setting of the show took place in Mexico and Texas and would also feature dance numbers by the Albertina Rausch Girls. It was being heralded as one of Ziegfeld's greatest productions to date. He spared no expense on hiring the best costume designers of the time, the Eves Costume Company, and some of the top stage designers. Opening night was a big success, but soon the problems would come. According to an article from February 9th, the second night of the show, Ethelyn Terry broke down in the middle of a song in the first act. The curtains were drawn when it was reported she burst into tears. But then she came back in the second act and the audience applauded, but she had to speak instead of sing the lyrics for the rest of the show. Also on the second night, Ziegfeld got sick. He had a fever of 102 and was suffering with laryngitis. His physician, Dr. Jerome Wagner, ordered him to bed for 2 weeks. Some said it was brought on by his star almost canning the show that very night. Despite the rocky start, audiences were flocking to the theater, and Rio Rita was one of the top shows on Broadway and one of the top grossing shows, bringing in over $52,000 for a 6-night run. Remember, that's in 1927 money. Then a complaint against Ziegfeld was filed in Supreme Court by the Yves Costume Company on April 6, 1927, demanding that he either pay the $17,819 he owed them on the costumes for Rio Rita or return them. Then a month later in May, Edward Royce, the stage director, filed a suit of his own, charging that Ziegfeld broke an agreement of $1,000 a week as stage director while Rio Rita was in rehearsal and 1% of the gross receipts thereafter. The damages he was claiming against Ziegfeld was $100,000. He filed the suit after he was discharged from the show. Ziegfeld responded he discharged Royce because he was incompetent and he had to call in John Harwood and Sammy Lee to fix up Rio Rita. The show ran for over just a year, having its closing night on April 7, 1928. So obviously, Ziegfeld came through all those lawsuits. Not much was known about Yvonne's romantic life, but that was about to change in February of 1928. An article came out on February 12th that would start to shine a spotlight into her privacy, although readers would not know yet she was a mysterious woman in the article. Gordon Godowsky, son of pianist, elopes. Dagmar Godowsky, film actress, yesterday confirmed a report that her 22-year-old brother, Gordon Godowsky, son of Leopold Godowsky, famous pianist and composer, has left his studies at Harvard University unexpectedly some days ago and married a young woman without informing his family. "We don't even know the young woman's name," said Miss Godowsky. "All we know is that my brother suddenly left the university and got married, and we presume that he and his bride are now on the honeymoon trip." My father is, of course, surprised that Gordon did not finish his education at Harvard. He was in his senior year and made English literature his major course. He planned to go to Oxford University next year. The pianist and his family, who live at Park Central Hotel, are now awaiting word from the Sun. They have been unable to ascertain even from the son's friends when, where, or by whom he was married. They would like to know the identity of the bride. Then a few days later in the papers it was revealed the identity of his bride, with Yvonne's name taking precedence in the headline. Harvard student married to Yvonne E. Hughes in Harrison, New York by Justice of the Peace. The article goes on to describe the occasion. The ceremony was performed in the small courtroom of the Harrison Police Station by Justice of the Peace Cornelius J. Sullivan, who is station agent of the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad in that town. Accompanying the couple were Fred Colmar, 23 years old, of 3708 Walnut Street, Philadelphia, and Miss Maxine Sickle, 22, of the Sylvania Hotel, Philadelphia, who were also married by Judge Sullivan. Mrs. Madeline Miller and A.D. Gruskin were witnesses at both the marriages. And from this New York State Marriage Index, we can see the exact date they were married, February 14th. The Colmars are listed in the same index on the same date as being married. Side note, Fred Colmar would become a well-known Hollywood producer. Some of his future movie credits would be The Last Angry Man, Pal Joey, Bye Bye Birdie, and The Ghost and Mrs. Muir. So did Gordon's father really not know about his relationship? According to the news of the time, Leopold Godowsky knew he was dating a showgirl and was disappointed. In fact, Leopold thought the couple had married on January 21st, and that is the very day he disinherited his son and closed the doors on him. Was he more angry that he dropped out of university or that he married a showgirl? Now, I find it hard to believe the family didn't know it was Yvonne he was dating, or that they didn't know her. Going back to the movie A Sainted Devil, the movie that magazines at the time state Yvonne was in, a person who was credited for being in that movie was none other than Dagmar Godowsky, Gordon's sister. It is possible that Yvonne met Gordon during or shortly after the filming of that movie. It is difficult to know for sure. But maybe the couple had to try to keep the relationship a secret from the family, especially the father. Some gossip that Yvonne was a gold digger, but she still married Gordon a month after he was disinherited. So it wasn't about the money. But it is interesting they married 2 days after the initial article with his sister came out. Gordon was trying to earn a living somewhat as a super in a Broadway show, making $20 a week. No doubt Yvonne assisted in helping him get that job. He acted as a liaison between the stage manager, director, and technical staff. But it was mainly Yvonne's income that was keeping the married couple afloat. Later in 1928, Yvonne was back in rehearsals for the next Ziegfeld show, Whoopee, starring Ruth Etting, Eddie Cantor, and Gene Ackerman. It had its premiere at the New Amsterdam Theater in New York on December 4th, 1928, and closed November 23rd, 1929. Yvonne was credited under her maiden name, Hughes, as one of the ensemble. She was happy to be on stage, but it seemed her career had stalled. A month later, in December 1929, it seemed the honeymoon was over. Gordon and Yvonne separated. The young Gordon Godowskis, one of whom is the former Yvonne Hughes, late of the musical show Whoopee, have parted. Godowsky, son of Leopold Godowsky, pianist and composer, explained today that clash of temperament brought about the rift, but he still loved Yvonne, whom he married in 1928. Some thought the strain from the disappointment from his father was partially to blame, although they had not seen each other since before the marriage. Others thought finances might have been the issue. Those that liked gossip said, "That's what you get for throwing away a Harvard education for a showgirl." In January 1930, a brief announcement in the paper said Yvonne had been engaged for the Broadway show The International Review, although her name does not have credit for the show on IMDB, Internet Broadway Database. The show had its opening night February 25th, 1930, and had its closing night a few months later on May 17th, 1930. Also in January, it was rumored Gordon was in Paris, where it was reported he was planning to secure an easy French divorce. When asked, Yvonne said the rift in her romance with the Godowsky is the result of an Abby's Irish Rose romance of real life that didn't turn out like the stage version. Abby's Irish Rose was a long-running Broadway play that was adapted for the screen and released in November of 1928. It starred Buddy Rogers and Nancy Carroll. The story involves a Jewish man marrying a Catholic girl despite the objection of both families. But unlike Yvonne's marriage, love triumphs in the end. Godowsky, the son of a famous Jewish pianist, and Yvonne, whose family were part Irish and Catholic, had some similarity to the characters. It seemed Yvonne was pointing out that part of the problem for Gordon's father wasn't just her being a showgirl, but also that she wasn't Jewish. It seemed Yvonne was everything the Godowskis didn't want in a wife for their son. The pressure on Gordon must have been huge, which caused a great tear in his relationship with Yvonne that might not have been repairable. Seems like love could not conquer all. If Gordon had gone to Paris, it would have been his father that would have paid for that trip, as Gordon wouldn't have had any money to speak of. Yvonne was the main breadwinner in that marriage, and they were barely getting by. And he wouldn't have been able to save up any money. From an April 1930 census, we see where Yvonne was staying. She had moved to Miami Beach, Florida. She was staying with an Abraham Gratz and his wife, Viola, and Yvonne is listed as a guest. Viola was in fact Yvonne's sister. The address was 148 8th Street. The fact she was living with her sister in April, and with the show The International Review having closed in May, she must have left the show early, if she was even in it at all. On October 6, 1930, according to the papers, Yvonne moved back to New York and decided to sue Leopold Godowsky, Gordon's father. She was charging him with the alienation of her husband's affections and was seeking $100,000 in restitution. She also filed for a divorce, as it seems the rumor of Gordon filing for a divorce when he was in Paris was just that, a rumor. She was once again being called a gold digger in some small circles, many forgetting that she did marry Gordon after he was disowned and disinherited. There is no information on what happened due to the lawsuit, nothing in the papers, nothing reported. Did she drop the lawsuit? Did they settle out of court? Highly unlikely. Yvonne was struggling, still getting some shows, but always in the background. Her brief bit of fame where she danced with Valentino and appeared on screen with Gloria Swanson was gone. If she did go through with the lawsuit, the Godowskis would have had the money to hire the best, toughest lawyers, and Yvonne would have lost. According to a January 2, 1932 article, Yvonne was still part of the Chorus Equity Association. This was a union that was first organized by the dancers and performers in the Ziegfeld Follies and would later merge with the Actors Equity Association in 1955. Was she still performing? Her name never appears with any show again, so it seems if she did, she was in the background, not important enough to mention. But something was unraveling in Yvonne. With the loss of her marriage, failed lawsuit, and her career slipping away, she turned to what many actresses and dancers turn to: alcohol, to cope. Yvonne seemed to disappear into the shadows. On a mid-August evening in New York, Columbia Broadcasting's Frederick William Weil hailed a cab to take him to Albany to see Governor Roosevelt. He noticed the driver's name and he couldn't believe it. When they stopped at a set of traffic lights, he asked the driver, "Your last name is Godowsky. Are you related to Leopold Godowsky?" The driver said yes, and that he was the son, Gordon. Gordon never went back to his father. Did his father not accept him back? Could Gordon not forgive his father for disowning him when he married Yvonne, whom he loved? There is no clear answer, but Gordon never went back to finish his education, and he was now living in a New York rooming house and driving a New York cab to try and make ends meet. If Leopold would have just accepted the marriage in the first place, what kind of life would Gordon and Yvonne be living during this time? One can say the both of them would probably be a lot happier and maybe even still married. As it were, the both of them were struggling and miserable. On a cold Friday morning, October 28, 1932, a woman was found wandering around Delancey and Cannon Streets near the Williamsburg Bridge in New York. She was wearing nothing but red silk pajamas and was in bare feet. When the police arrived, the woman seemed in a daze and did not respond to any questions. They took her to the Bellevue Hospital for examination. It was Yvonne. Her name was again in the papers, but not due to a show or a movie, but due to her hitting rock bottom and having a breakdown. After she was released, she just seemed to disappear again. Less than 2 months later, on December 28th, another tragic chapter to Yvonne's story would see her name in print again. Gordon Godowsky, youngest of the 4 children of Leopold Godowsky, noted composer and pianist, ended his life yesterday by inhaling gas in a rooming house at 46 West 72nd Street, where he had been living for several months. He was 26 years old and employed in the office of a taxicab company in charge of the parts and service department. He had been ill several days with influenza and remained in his room on the second floor. When Mrs. May Kopilak, the housekeeper, smelled gas on the third floor, she was mystified, as she knew one room on that floor had no tenant, while the lodgers who occupied the others were out. Recalling on her way downstairs that Mr. Godowsky had been ill and despondent, she paused to look into his room and found it empty. She summoned the police. Mr. Godowsky was found on a daybed in the unoccupied room on the third floor with one end of a rubber tube in his mouth and the other end attached to a gas jet on the wall just above his head. The tube he had looped around his arm and secured with a cord. Efforts to revive him fail. After working over Mr. Godowsky for nearly an hour with an inhalator, Dr. Conant of Knickerbocker Hospital pronounced him dead. While this work was going on, the telephone rang. Mrs. Venita Godowsky-Saperton, the young man's sister, who lives at 171 West 71st Street, called the housekeeper to inquire about her brother, knowing he was ill. Mrs. Saperton hurried to the house accompanied by her other brother, Leopold Godowsky Jr., who is associated with the Eastman Kodak Company at Rochester, New York, and who was in New York with his wife, sister of George Gershwin, the composer, for the holidays. Young Mr. Godowsky left no notes. In his room on the second floor, the police found a wristwatch, $4.20 in his pockets, a passport issued in 1929 for travel in Germany, and a chauffeur's license. At the office of the Keystone Transportation Company, 1758 New York Avenue, it was said Godowsky had driven a taxi for 2 months, and then about 7 months ago had been taken into the office. It was said that he attempted to commit suicide about 4 months ago by cutting his wrists. Mrs. Kopilak told the police he had been despondent, having no money, and had threatened a few days ago to end it all unless he received some money he expected. Saperton said she could give no reason for her brother's act, although he had become very depressed during his illness. "My brother was too proud," she said to the police. "If he had only come to me or to his brother Leopold, we would have gladly given him aid." After leaving the rooming house, Mrs. Saperton and her brother went to the Hotel Ansonia to tell their father, who arrived here several months ago from Europe and has been resting after a long illness. Mrs. Godowsky, the mother, and her daughter Dagmar Godowsky, the motion picture actress, are at present in Berlin. Leopold Godowsky Jr. denied the report that his father had disowned Gordon after his secret marriage in 1928, while he was a student at Harvard, to Yvonne Evelyn Hughes, former Follies girl. "It is not true that father disowned Gordon," he said. "They have been on the best of terms, and father has been helping him. Gordon had a very bad case of influenza and was greatly depressed." After his marriage to Miss Hughes by a justice of the peace in Harrison, New York, on February 14, 1928, young Mr. Godowsky gave up his plans to continue his studies at Oxford. They separated a year later, but have never been divorced. In 1930, when his wife contended that she had supported Gordon since their marriage, his brother and 2 sisters issued a denial. Gordon was only 27 years old. He was buried at the Temple Israel Cemetery on Hastings-on-Hudson, Westchester County, New York. And as you can see from the article, Yvonne and Gordon were still married. They were only separated. It seems that Gordon's family was denying everything previously reported in the papers, that his father didn't disown him, and that he was not disinherited, and that he and his father were on the best of terms. His brother did say he was greatly depressed, but seemed to blame influenza for the horrible decision Gordon made. But why would he be greatly depressed in the first place? It clearly states he had attempted to delete himself before. Also, Mrs. Kopilak, a witness after the fact, again told the police he had been despondent about having no money and had threatened to end it all unless he received some of the money he expected. The only source of that money would be his father. Then Gordon's sister seems to contradict that story, stating that her brother was too proud and wished he had come to her or his other brother and they would have given him aid. Not go to their father, but to them. We may never know the complete truth as to what was going on in that family or what drove Gordon to this horrible and irreversible decision. If he was disinherited in January of 1928, he still married Yvonne a month later. He gave up money for love. And remember, Yvonne still agreed to marry him, knowing they might have to depend on her income, even for a little while, until he got on his own 2 feet. But that never happened. Gordon still loved Yvonne when they separated. He even stated that, and it seems she returned that love. Is it a case he couldn't forgive his father, or his father couldn't forgive him? Pride was involved, and that pride cost a life and changed other lives forever, including Yvonne, who would never be the same again. Yvonne started drinking more. The offers for shows dried up. Yvonne disappeared. She went back to Miami to visit with her sister, but would eventually find herself back in New York. The city always seemed to call her back. In 1936, she met a man called John MacDonald, who ironically was a New York taxi driver. They moved from rooming house to rooming house over the years and finally settled into the Ashland Hotel, which was on 429 4th Avenue and is now part of Park Avenue today. The hotel still stands, and it was last a Clarion Hotel, even though on this Google Street View it says 425, this is the old Ashland Hotel. It seemed Yvonne disappeared into obscurity. No one would know or seem to care where she was. That was all to change in December 1950. Yvonne was finally about to become famous. Her name would appear in headlines again, but under the most horrible of circumstances. It was early morning on Tuesday, December 26, 1950. Shirley Ruggles, a maid at the Ashland Hotel, had started doing her rounds, cleaning the rooms and replacing linen. The next room she entered, she noticed the strong smell of beer and cigarettes in the air. She looked around to see overflowing ashtrays on the table and beer cans strewn all over the place. Then she saw a woman laying motionless on the carpet, her body somewhat contorted and fully clothed, a shoe laying beside her. Shirley called out, but there was no reaction. Then she saw the handkerchief around the woman's neck and something stuffed in her mouth. The maid screamed and went to get help. It was Yvonne. She was dead. The police arrived at the hotel to conduct their investigation. While one of the police officers was stationed at the hotel switchboard, a call came in and the officer answered. It was a man with an accent that asked if there had been any trouble on Monday night at the hotel. The call came in from another hotel in Utica. The man had asked the hotel manager there at the front desk to place the call. The police then spoke to that manager, and they asked them to try and detain the man until local detectives arrived. Several hours after Yvonne's body was found by the maid, the detectives in Utica picked up a Berger Nordquist, 41, an apple picker from Hamlin in western New York. He was booked as a fugitive from justice, and he was still intoxicated when they slapped the handcuffs on him. They took him in for questioning without telling him that Yvonne was dead. Deputy Chief James Leno of the Utica Police Department said when they asked Nordquist if he knew Yvonne Hughes, Nordquist instead inquired, "How does she feel?" He also said Nordquist mentioned that he didn't know why he went to Utica and claimed he couldn't remember anything about the last 4 days. He did have a piece of paper with Yvonne's name and the address of the Ashland Hotel on it in his pocket. John MacDonald, her common-law husband, was also interviewed by police. He first met Nordquist Christmas Eve when he hailed his cab. He took Nordquist to the hotel where the apple picker sought an inexpensive room, and he ended up getting a room near Yvonne and John's on the same floor. It was Nordquist's room Yvonne was found in. John went on to say that Yvonne had been drinking heavily and had torn up all her theatrical pictures of her showgirl days. He said he brought her 4 more cans of beer midnight on the 25th before he went back on his route. That was the last time he saw her alive. According to Assistant District Attorney Carl Grebo, Nordquist came down from upstate New York looking for a brief holiday. He got into a cab driven by John MacDonald and sought advice on cheap lodgings. MacDonald offered to take him to the Ashland, where he was introduced to Yvonne, confirming the statement as told by MacDonald. Nordquist was held without bail in felony court for a hearing on January 15th on a homicide charge. He first pleaded his innocence in the matter, stating he couldn't remember anything. On December 28th, he finally confessed to slaying Yvonne. Captain Edward Feely quoted Nordquist of saying, "I didn't know why I did it." Feely said Nordquist told him that he had been drinking heavily and blew his top when Yvonne resisted his advances late Christmas night. Through questioning, a clearer picture emerged on exactly what happened. Nordquist, a heavy drinker, invited others to a party in his hotel room Christmas night. The party consisted of huge amounts of beer and other alcohol. It seemed no one else came to the party, and Nordquist and Yvonne were alone, drinking heavily, listening to music, and Yvonne talking about her past glory days. Around 3 a.m. the morning of December 26, a very intoxicated Yvonne got up and tried to recreate some of the dances she did while she was still with the Follies. She was trying to remember and perhaps recreate the better times in her life. This is when Nordquist made advances towards her. When she angrily rebuffed him, he struck her. She screamed. That's when he shoved her scarf in her mouth and started to strangle her with his handkerchief. The police also stated Nordquist throttled her in the process. A bit more on Nordquist's background was brought to light as well. Born in Sweden, he first worked as a seaman and then a lumberjack. At the time of the murder, he was employed at the Duffy Mott Company in Hamlin, a company that made apple cider. On January 4th, 1951, Birger Nordquist was indicted by a New York County grand jury for first-degree murder in the strangulation death of Yvonne. The indictment was filed in general sessions before Judge Francis L. Valente. Nordquist had been held without bail and was to be arraigned on the true bill Friday, January 5th. Nordquist pleaded guilty. Justice for Yvonne would have to wait another 10 months, while Nordquist was waiting in jail for his sentence. On November 10th, 1951, Nordquist stood in front of General Sessions Judge John A. Mullen to hear his sentence: 5 to 10 years in state prison. In my own opinion, justice was definitely not served. I could not find any transcripts or any other information for why he got such a light sentence for such a brutal slaying. One could only imagine one of the defenses was that he was blind drunk. And horrid to think that maybe the court thought in some way Yvonne was just another drunk who was also to blame for her own death and the actions of her murderer. I could not find if he did serve the 10 years behind bars or only 5. But through genealogical research, it looks like as soon as he was let out, he fled back to Sweden. Yvonne would be buried back home in an unmarked grave under the name Evelyn Yvonne Hughes Godowski. She would be laid to rest at the McKeesport and Versailles Cemetery in McKeesport, Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, beside her parents. Yvonne was talented, always reaching for the stars, but they seemed to be out of her reach. Coming close, appearing on screen with great talents such as Valentino and Swanson, but she never got her one true big break. Her life is still shrouded in some mystery as to why she left her first marriage and family all those many years ago. Also, the full truth will never be known as to what happened in her relationship and marriage with Gordon Godowski, and why that ended in heartbreak and tragedy. Perhaps losing the one person she truly loved, causing her spiral downwards. The injustice she suffered at the hands of a drunk, evil man, and the further injustice of a court that may not have seen her life as worthy. A flawed woman who tried to live life to the fullest, lighting up the screen beside the greatest of the time and dancing in the most famous revue of all time. Her life should not be remembered for the way she died, but for the brief way she lived.